You and I are standing at the edge of a river plain that keeps everything alive. The ground is rich, but only if the water arrives at the right moment. Too much and the fields drown, too little and nothing grows, and yet people choose to live here anyway. That decision is the beginning of Sumer, and it is also the first question we have to hold. How do you build stability in a landscape that never truly sits still? If you imagine the earliest villages here, they are small and practical, but at some point the villages become something else. Storage rooms appear, temples rise, people stop farming and start managing grain. Others begin recording who owes what. The city does not simply grow in size, it reorganizes itself. And that shift leaves a signature in clay. The earliest writing we can see in Sumer does not begin with stories. It begins with lists, measures, and counts. It looks like accounting because it is. That is the first thread I want you to hold. Organization creates memory. A society that wants to coordinate labor and food must record it. Writing, in this sense, begins as a tool of administration, not as literature. You can feel how this changes power. A ruler without a record is a rumor. A ruler with a record is an institution. The more the system grows, the more it depends on records, and the more the records shape the system. That is why Sumer matters. It shows us the moment when memory becomes external, when a society starts to store itself in objects. Now Sumer is not a single kingdom. It is a mosaic of city-states. Uruk, Eridu, Nippur. Each one has its own god, its own temple economy, and its own identity. They share a culture, but they are not one nation. Sometimes they trade, sometimes they fight, sometimes they copy each other. That fragmentation looks chaotic, but it accelerates innovation. Competition forces specialization. Specialization forces organization. And that loop speeds everything up. Look at Uruk for a moment. By the late 4th millennium BCE, it is enormous for its time. It has monumental architecture, standardized artifacts, and a scale of coordination that does not happen by accident. This is not proof of a single dramatic event. It is evidence of a system that learned to organize itself. What makes Sumer distinct is not only the buildings, it is the economy underneath them. Temples are not just places of worship, they are also warehouses, offices, and courts. Priests manage food, labor, and ritual all at once. The sacred and the practical are not separate worlds. They are a single system. That system is powerful, but it is also fragile. It relies on timing, on trust, and on the stability of the environment. A shift in the rivers can strain everything. A conflict between cities can block trade. When you build an entire society on a delicate balance, the balance becomes the story. This is why Sumer does not follow a straight line. It rises, it strains, it adapts. The evidence suggests repeated cycles of growth and stress rather than a single uninterrupted march. The cities learn, they reorganize, they rebuild. And in that process, the culture becomes more layered, more complex, and more difficult to hold together. Now consider the people who made this system function. Not kings, not priests, but scribes. A scribe presses a reed into clay, recording barley, sheep, and workdays. It is routine, but it is the foundation of memory. That scribe might not know it, but he is building the bridge between his world and ours. This is how history survives, in ordinary hands. Yet even the strongest system cannot stop time. Languages shift, power moves, new rulers appear. What is remarkable about Sumer is not that it disappears, but that it disperses. The writing system continues. The myths continue. The administrative logic continues. Sumer becomes the past inside the present. There is a document that reflects this struggle to preserve continuity, the Sumerian king list. It lists rulers and reigns, some impossibly long. Most scholars read it as ideological rather than strictly historical. It is a political statement. Kingship is one thing and it moves from city to city. That does not make it useless. It makes it honest about its purpose. So when we talk about Sumer, we have to read two layers at once: the evidence of daily life and the stories people told to explain power. Those layers overlap, and they sometimes conflict, but together they show a society trying to hold itself together across generations. This brings us back to the first question. How do you build stability in a landscape that never truly sits still? Sumer's answer was organization. Writing, administration, temples, and a shared system of memory. It worked for a time. And then it changed. Not in a single collapse, but in a slow transformation as new powers rose and old cities adapted. That is the real lesson of Sumer. Civilization does not simply end. It fragments, it transforms, it travels. If you follow the traces, you can see the system learning how to remember itself and struggling to do so. In the next episode, we follow the moment when that mosaic of city-states is pulled into a new shape, the rise of Akkad, and the first large-scale empire in Mesopotamia. The question shifts from how cities organize themselves to how a region is forced to become one. You and I are stepping into a different kind of landscape now. The Sumerian city-states were a mosaic. Akkad is where that mosaic is pulled into a single shape. This episode is about scale, about how power stretches outward, what it gains, and what it risks losing. We will not claim final truth. We will follow the evidence and the patterns it suggests, and we will be careful about what remains debated. Begin with the name, Akkad. We still do not know exactly where its capital, Akkad, stood. That alone tells you something. This was the center of an empire, yet its precise location remains uncertain. That uncertainty is not failure. It is a reminder that archaeology works with incomplete maps. We can see the empire in inscriptions, in administrative records, and in the spread of a language, even when the capital itself hides. The traditional figure at the start is Sargon of Akkad. The dates for his reign are usually placed around the late 24th to early 23rd century BCE, but exact chronology varies by scholarly framework. The key point is not the number, it is the shift. Under Sargon and his successors, a new political idea takes shape, a single authority over multiple city-states. That is a major change from the Sumerian pattern. To understand what that means, imagine a network of cities that had always managed their own gods, their own grain, their own rivalries. Now imagine a central authority that claims to be responsible for all of them. It is not only a military conquest, it is an administrative transformation. Records become broader, taxes become imperial, the language of legitimacy changes. One of the clearest indicators of this shift is language. Akkadian, a Semitic language, begins to spread and acquire prestige. Over time, it becomes a language of administration and literature. It does not erase Sumerian at once. Instead, the two languages coexist for centuries. But Akkadian rises to a new role. It becomes the imperial language of record, and later, a major lingua franca across the Near East. This is a subtle kind of conquest, not just of territory, but of paperwork. This is the second thread to hold. Empire is as much about coordination as it is about war. Armies can take a city, but only administration can keep it. Akkad's power is visible not only in victory stele, but in the standardization of records, the consistency of seals, and the geographic reach of its inscriptions. Now let's look at one of the most striking rulers, Naram-Sin. He is remembered for military campaigns, but also for a different kind of shift. In inscriptions, he is described with divine language. The line between king and god grows thinner. This is not simply vanity, it is a political technology. If the empire is to hold, the king must be more than a regional ruler. He must be a cosmic center. This is a deep change in how authority is presented. If you imagine the psychological effect of that, you can see the stakes. The more power is centralized, the more the center must justify itself. Divine kingship is one answer, but it is not the only answer, and it comes with risks. If a ruler is framed as a god, then failure becomes cosmic. The system becomes less flexible. And in a region as volatile as Mesopotamia, flexibility is a form of survival. We should be careful here. Much of what we know comes from texts that were themselves political. Royal inscriptions are not neutral reports. They are statements of legitimacy. That is true for Sumer, and it is even more true for Akkad. So we read them as evidence, but we do not treat them as perfect mirrors of reality. The empire's reach appears wide. There are records and inscriptions that show influence beyond Mesopotamia itself. This is where the historical record suggests Akkad's sway extended into neighboring regions, with garrisons, trade routes, and political control. Yet here again, our confidence is about patterns, not about absolute certainty. The empire's boundaries shift, and they likely changed over time. Now let's talk about the people who made this system work. Bureaucrats, scribes, administrators. When an empire expands, it needs a nervous system. The nervous system is the archive. Clay tablets do not just record grain, they record the existence of a state. The more tablets you find, the more you can infer about how the system operated. In that sense, the archive is the body of Akkad. But bodies can be stressed. And here we reach the most debated part of the Akkadian story, its decline. There are multiple theories, and none should be treated as a single answer. Some scholars emphasize political instability, including rebellions and external pressures. Others highlight environmental stress, including evidence of regional drying around the time of Akkad's decline. There is a proposed climate event around 42,000 years ago that may have affected rainfall patterns in Mesopotamia. The key word is may. Evidence suggests correlation, but causation is debated. It is tempting to look for a single cause. The evidence does not support that simplicity. Empires rarely collapse from one factor. They strain under multiple pressures at once. A stressed environment can magnify political weakness. A contested succession can magnify external threats, and overextension can magnify everything. Here is the most careful way to hold it. The Akkadian Empire appears to have declined in a period of increased stress, including possible climatic aridification, internal fragmentation, and external incursions. The exact balance between those forces is still debated. That uncertainty is not a failure of history. It is the honest boundary of what we can say. What happens afterward is equally important. The decline of Akkad is not the end of Mesopotamian civilization. It is a transformation. New powers rise. In the south, Sumerian traditions return in new forms. In the north, Akkadian language and administrative practices persist. The empire leaves behind a template. Even when the political structure falls, the administrative logic remains. Think about the effect of that template. It means that later states can inherit a ready-made system of governance. It means that the idea of empire, one center, many cities, does not vanish. It becomes a model. And that model will be used again and again in Mesopotamia. This is why Akkad matters. It is not only the first empire in the region, it is a demonstration of how scale changes everything. It shows that power is not only about conquering a city, but about keeping records, enforcing standards, and projecting legitimacy across distances. And it also shows the cost. The larger the system, the more vulnerable it is to disruption. The same networks that spread authority can also spread instability. The same roads that carry goods can carry invaders. The same centralization that creates order can create fragility. There is a quiet continuity between this and our previous episode. Sumer taught us how cities organize themselves. Akkad teaches us what happens when an organizer tries to oversee many cities at once. It is a leap in scale, and with scale comes new kinds of risk. If you stand back, you can see the arc. Sumer creates the tools of organization: writing, temple economies, administrative memory. Akkad takes those tools and turns them outward, building a state that stretches across a region. That is why the Akkadian period is both a culmination and a beginning. It is the moment when Mesopotamia becomes more than a collection of cities. It becomes an empire. The questions that follow are the questions of recovery. What does a region do after an empire? How does it rebuild stability without losing the lessons of scale? That is where our next episode begins. We move into the period of restoration known as Ur-III, where the old city of Ur becomes a new center, and bureaucracy reaches an even finer level of control. So as you leave this episode, hold the tension in your mind. Empire brings order and vulnerability at the same time. Akkad's legacy is not only conquest. It is the blueprint of how large states think, and the warning that no blueprint is permanent. You and I are stepping into a period that feels quieter on the surface, but tighter in its structure. After the Akkadian Empire fractures, the South does something remarkable. It rebuilds. The city of Ur becomes the center of a new order we call Ur-III, or the third dynasty of Ur. This episode is about restoration through administration, how a society tries to pull itself back together, not with conquest, but with record-keeping, organization, and a deep belief that order can be designed. Begin with the problem they inherit. Akkad's empire has weakened. The region is fragmented. Local rulers reassert control. Trade networks are unstable. The question is not just who rules, but how to make the system predictable again. Ur-III is one of the clearest answers in Mesopotamian history, a state that runs on bureaucracy. Imagine the city of Ur at this moment. It is old, respected, and strategically placed. The rulers who rise there, often associated with kings like Ur-Namma and Shulgi, do not simply rebuild temples. They rebuild the machinery of the state. They standardize measures. They formalize labor obligations. They create a paper trail in clay that is so dense that thousands of tablets still survive. This is the first thread to hold. Ur-III is not just a dynasty, it is an administrative system. If Akkad showed what empire could look like, Ur-III shows what a disciplined state could feel like. The scale is smaller than Akkad's reach, but the control inside its borders is intense. You can see that control in the records. The surviving tablets document rations, work assignments, deliveries, and deadlines. They track barley, wool, and laborers by name. This is not a vague impression. It is a structured archive. The existence of that archive suggests a state that believes it can manage every part of its economy. Think about what that means in daily life. A farmer does not only answer to the land, he answers to a schedule. A temple is not only a sacred site, it is a redistribution center. Workers are assigned. Outputs are measured. The system relies on compliance, and compliance is achieved through record keeping. If Sumer gave us writing as an administrative tool, Ur-III gives us a mature version of that tool. The state becomes a machine that records itself. This is why historians can see Ur-III with such clarity. The bureaucratic structure is visible because it left so many traces. And yet this clarity carries a warning. A system that records everything also depends on everything being recorded. It can become rigid. When conditions shift, a rigid system struggles to adapt. Ur-III is powerful, but it is also vulnerable to the same kind of strain that affects all centralized systems. Now consider the role of the king in this structure. In Ur-III, kingship is presented not only as political leadership, but as a moral and cosmic responsibility. The king is expected to maintain justice, oversee the economy, and keep order in both the human and divine realms. This is a heavy role. It is also a narrative device. It tells the population that the system is not just efficient, but legitimate. One of the ways this legitimacy is maintained is through law. Ur-Namma is associated with one of the earliest known law codes. Whether the code was fully applied in daily life or served as a symbolic statement is debated, but the existence of a codified legal framework suggests a society that wants to define fairness in formal terms. The law is not just a tool of punishment. It is a statement of how the state wants to be perceived. This brings us to the second thread. Ur-III is about order as ideology. It is not only a practical system, it is a moral narrative. The king is the guarantor of justice. The bureaucracy is the mechanism of stability. The city is the model of a well-run world. At the same time, the state depends on labor, and the labor system is intensive. Many workers are assigned tasks through the administration. Some are free, some are bound to institutional service. This is a controlled economy, and it requires constant oversight. The tablets show how detailed that oversight was, and they show how much effort the state invested in tracking people and goods. Now, a question often asked is whether Ur-III represents a golden age or a highly controlled system. The answer is, both can be true depending on perspective. For the state, the system looks efficient and orderly. For individuals under its control, the system could feel rigid. This is a reminder that administrative clarity does not always mean social freedom. The economy of Ur-III also reveals how interconnected the region remained. Even as the state tried to control its interior, it engaged in long-distance exchange for materials not available locally. Metals, timber, stone. These networks link Ur to distant regions and show that even a tightly managed economy still depends on external flows. That dependence is a vulnerability. If trade routes are disrupted, the system strains. If external pressure rises, the internal order is tested. Ur-III can manage its records, but it cannot fully control the world beyond its reach. This is where we start to see the tension building. The state's administrative strength is also its weakness. It requires a high level of coordination. It assumes that conditions will remain stable enough for schedules to hold. But history rarely allows that for long. So what happens when conditions shift? The evidence suggests increasing pressure from neighboring groups and changes in regional dynamics. There are references to conflicts, to frontier instability, to the difficulty of maintaining control at the edges. Over time, the center becomes stretched. We should be careful here again. The exact causes of Ur-III's decline are debated. Some emphasize external pressures, others highlight internal strain. It is likely a combination. As always, large systems rarely fail for a single reason. They weaken as multiple stresses align. When Ur-III declines, it leaves behind a legacy that is different from Akkad's. Akkad left a model of imperial ambition. Ur-III leaves a model of administrative precision. Later kingdoms will borrow its practices, its legal language, its methods of record keeping. The bureaucracy survives even when the dynasty does not. This is a crucial idea. Systems outlive rulers. Ur-III shows how a state can build a durable framework that others inherit. This is the continuity in Mesopotamian history. Power changes hands, but administrative memory persists. If you step back, you can see the sequence now. Sumer created the tools of organization. Akkad expanded those tools across a region. Ur-III refined them into a disciplined internal system. Each stage builds on the previous one, and each stage introduces new vulnerabilities. So what is the emotional core of Ur-III? It is the desire to restore order after chaos. It is the belief that if you can count everything, you can control everything. It is the hope that records can prevent disorder. That hope is powerful, and it is also fragile. And that takes us to the next episode. After Ur-II, the political landscape shifts again, and a new center rises, Babylon. There, law, trade, and identity become the new language of power. The question changes once more. When order is restored through rules, what happens to the people who live inside those rules? That is where we go next. You and I are walking into a city that believes order can be written down. After Ur-II, power in the south does not disappear, it reorganizes. A new center rises along the Euphrates, Babylon. This is the old Babylonian period, and it is less about a single empire and more about a web of cities, alliances, contracts, and laws. The story here is not just conquest. It is how a state convinces people that rules are the way back to stability. Start with the landscape. The rivers still decide everything. Irrigation schedules, canal maintenance, flood control, and planting cycles are the real foundations of power. A king can declare authority, but if the canals fail, the authority feels hollow. Babylon grows because it is positioned to manage and tax these flows, and because it can connect smaller cities into a system that feels reliable. Now imagine the city itself. Babylon is not yet the legendary metropolis of later centuries, but it is already a symbolic center. It sits among other strong cities, Larsa, Isin, Eshnunna, Mari. These are not minor towns. They are rivals with their own kings, temples, and economic networks. The old Babylonian period is a chessboard, and Babylon is learning how to move. Let me put you on a street there. The air is dusty. Pack animals move between warehouses. A scribe is seated in the shade with a stack of clay. He is not writing poetry. He is recording a loan of silver, a sale of land, a shipment of grain. This is a society that runs on contracts. The tablets are the evidence. They do not tell a single story, but they reveal a culture that has learned to make obligations visible. This is where Hammurabi enters the scene. He is not the first king of Babylon, but he becomes the one most remembered. We should be careful. The fame of a ruler is often as much about later memory as it is about actual events. Still, the evidence suggests a real shift under Hammurabi. He expands Babylon's influence through war and diplomacy, but also through administration. The key change is not only who he defeats, it is how he builds a lasting framework. The most famous piece of that framework is the law code. You and I have to be precise here. The Code of Hammurabi is not a full legal system in the modern sense. It is a collection of legal statements, likely used as a public declaration of ideals and royal authority. Some scholars debate how directly it was applied in daily courts. That debate matters. It reminds us that a written code can be both practical and symbolic at once. What is clear is the intent. The code says, in effect, order has a shape and the king is its author. It speaks in conditional clauses. If this happens, then that happens. The language is meant to feel predictable. In a world that remembers the collapse of Akkad and the strict order of Ur-II, predictability is a promise. But law is only one layer. Look deeper and you see a complex economy of contracts. The old Babylonian period is filled with tablets documenting loans, sales, marriages, adoptions, rentals, and labor agreements. This is not an economy of pure barter. It is a system that runs on obligations and receipts. People are bound to each other through written terms. The archives show this in extraordinary detail. Think about what that means for ordinary life. A farmer takes a loan for seed and promises repayment after harvest. A household adopts a child and records inheritance arrangements. A merchant signs a contract to deliver wool to a temple. These are not grand royal acts. They are daily decisions written in clay. The state is powerful, but it also depends on the private contracts that make the economy function. So the old Babylonian world is not just a palace. It is a network of households, temples, and traders. Temples remain important, but they are not the only centers anymore. There is more private property, more individual contracts, and more visible legal process. If Ur-III was a machine of state administration, Old Babylon is a legal culture that mixes public authority with private agreements. Now follow the political story. Babylon does not become dominant overnight. Hammurabi navigates alliances and rivalries. The city of Mari on the Euphrates is a key partner and later a target. The letters from Mari show a world of diplomacy, intelligence reports, and shifting loyalties. If you want to feel the period, read those letters as if they were emails from a fragile coalition. They show how uncertain everything was and how carefully kings had to manage information. This is an important shift in tone from Ur-III. There, the state tries to control everything through a centralized archive. Here, the state is building power in a competitive environment. It is not a closed system. It is a system that listens, negotiates, and then acts. The tools of control are different, not just schedules and rations, but alliances, treaties, and legal authority. Hammurabi's conquests eventually give Babylon a wider reach, but the reach is not eternal. After his death, power strains again. That is a pattern we will see repeatedly. A strong ruler can expand a system, but the system must be sustained by more than the ruler's charisma or strategy. The fact that later rulers struggle is part of the story, not an exception to it. Let us pause in a courtroom. A dispute is being decided, a loan unpaid, a boundary contested, a promised marriage broken. The decision is recorded, witnesses are named, the tablet is sealed. This is how authority becomes real. The court is the hinge between private life and public order, and the written record makes that hinge durable. This brings us to the social fabric. The law code and contracts show a society that is stratified. Free citizens, dependent workers, enslaved people, and temple staff all appear in the records. The law treats these categories differently. We should not soften that reality. It is part of what makes the period legible. The code is not only about justice, it is about hierarchy and property. At the same time, the code also suggests limits. It sets penalties for false accusation. It describes protections for property. It regulates wages, loans, and interest. Whether it was enforced everywhere is debated, but the intent is visible. The state wants to present itself as a guarantor of fairness, even if the fairness is unequal by modern standards. This is how authority is legitimized. I want you to feel the tension here. On one hand, the period is full of writing and contracts. That feels modern. On the other hand, the law is explicit about inequality. That feels foreign. The old Babylonian world is not a simple precursor to modern law. It is its own system with its own logic. Now think about debt. Credit keeps the system moving, but it also creates pressure. If a harvest fails, repayment becomes impossible. If repayment fails, households can lose land or fall into dependency. The records show how debt can push people into long-term obligation. It is another reminder that stability is fragile, and that rules often exist because people keep failing the rules. There are also times when rulers cancel or reduce debts. These acts are political tools as much as moral gestures. They reset the system when it becomes too strained. We should be careful not to claim how often or how uniformly this happened, but the pattern is visible in the way rulers present themselves, as restorers who can reset social tension. Now picture the labor that keeps the canals open. A state can write laws, but it also needs hands in the mud. Labor obligations appear in the records as service owed to the crown or temples. You see a world where seasonal work is coordinated, recorded, and sometimes enforced. These details remind us that administration is not abstract. It touches bodies and time. The seasons themselves are part of the story. Planting, irrigation, harvest, and storage create a rhythm that contracts must follow. Grain is measured and moved at predictable times. Rations are assigned. Payments are scheduled. The written economy mirrors the agricultural calendar. When the calendar slips, the legal system feels the shock. In the marketplaces, prices rise and fall. Silver and barley function as measures of value in different contexts. The records show rates of interest, penalties for delays, and rules for storage. We should not treat this as a modern market, but it is a system with rules, expectations, and consequences. That is why the tablets are so often about money. Money is a way to keep the system legible. Zoom in on household life. Property is often shared within families, and contracts clarify who owes what. Women appear in the records not only as spouses, but also as property holders and litigants. The evidence is uneven, and we should avoid sweeping claims, but it shows that legal identity could be complex. A society that writes its agreements also writes its relationships. Now follow the economy beyond the city walls. Traders move along river routes. Metal, timber, and stone come from regions that Babylon does not control directly. Merchants organize caravans. Temples purchase goods for offerings. Palaces demand deliveries for construction. Even a legal culture needs materials, and those materials come from a wider world. This is where vulnerability reappears. A state can control internal courts, but it cannot control every external flow. If routes are disrupted, prices rise, debts become harder to pay, and contracts strain. The law can regulate, but it cannot conjure resources. Stability is a negotiation between rules and reality. There is also a cultural layer. Schools train scribes in both practical writing and literary tradition. That means we can see both the economic engine and the cultural imagination of the time. A student learns how to write a loan contract and also how to copy an epic. This is a society that teaches administration and memory together. If you zoom out, you can see how identity is being shaped. Babylon positions itself as a center of tradition and order. It inherits Sumerian literary culture, Akkadian administrative practices, and Ur-Ii's memory of discipline. It combines them into a new identity. This is how cultures survive. They borrow, refine, and reframe. There is also a spiritual layer. Temples remain powerful, but royal authority increasingly presents itself as the mediator between gods and people. The king is still a pious builder, but he is also a lawgiver. The message is subtle. Order is not only divine, it is institutional. The state is the bridge between heaven and human life. Another way to feel this is to look at the stela of the law code. The king is shown receiving authority from the gods. It is not only a legal text, it is a visual statement that law is sacred. Again, whether this image translated into daily enforcement is debated, but the symbolism is not subtle. Now consider the northern and eastern edges. The Old Babylonian period is not isolated. Pressure increases over time from groups that are not fully integrated into Babylon's system. The details are complex and sometimes fragmentary, but the pattern is clear. The political map is still unstable. Cities rise and fall. Coalitions shift. External pressures grow. By the later Old Babylonian period, that pressure becomes a real problem. Kassite groups, among others, begin to appear in the record. The old balance of cities is changing. Babylon does not disappear, but it will have to reinvent itself again. The story is not a straight line. It is a cycle of rebuilding. So what is the emotional core of this episode? It is the belief that rules can hold a fragile world together. After centuries of collapse and restoration, Babylon offers a new answer. Not just administration, but law. Not just power, but a written promise of how power should behave. That promise is both powerful and limited. It gives a sense of order, but it does not remove uncertainty. It creates a framework, but it cannot stop change. The Old Babylonian period shows a society trying to design stability in the middle of competition and risk. If we place this in our series arc, the sequence becomes clear. Sumer taught us organization and memory. Akkad showed the reach of empire. Ur-II demonstrated administrative precision. Old Babylon brings legal culture and negotiated power. Each step adds a new layer to what a state can be, and each layer brings new vulnerabilities. And that leads us to the next episode. After the Old Babylonian period, the North becomes more dominant. Assyria rises with a different style of power, more militarized, more expansionist, more focused on imperial control. The question shifts again. When law is not enough, what does power become? That is where we go next. You and I are moving north now, into a different kind of power. After the legal culture of Old Babylon, Assyria rises with a harder edge. This episode is not about a single king. It is about a system that turns war and administration into a lasting engine. The Assyrian story is the story of a state that learns to expand, to control, and to remember itself through both fear and efficiency. Begin with geography. Assyria grows around the upper Tigris, in a landscape of river valleys, plains, and long-distance routes. It is closer to mountains and trade corridors than Babylon, and that changes its economy. Metals, timber, and horses move through these routes. If Babylon's power feels like law, Assyria's feels like logistics. Imagine the early city of Ashur. It is both a city and a god, a political center and a sacred symbol. The king rules, but he rules in the name of Ashur. This is not a small detail. It means the state's expansion is framed as a sacred duty, not just a political choice. The idea of expansion is built into the ideology. The Assyrian system is not built overnight. It evolves. You see periods of contraction and growth, but by the time Assyria becomes an empire, it has developed a disciplined military machine and a bureaucracy that can follow it. The crucial point is that war and administration are not separate. They are two halves of the same system. Here is the first thread to hold. Assyria perfects the art of moving resources and people at scale. Armies are organized, supplied, and rotated. Garrisons are placed along key routes. Roads are maintained. Couriers carry orders. This is not improvisation. It is planned movement, and it allows the state to project power beyond its core. Now picture the army itself. It is not just a mass of warriors. It is a structured force with infantry, archers, chariots, and later cavalry. Siege techniques become more advanced. The state invests in the technology of capture. When Assyria attacks a city, it brings engineering, coordination, and a terrifying reputation. The reputation is part of the strategy. It is meant to reduce resistance before a battle even begins. We should be careful here. The sources describing Assyrian brutality are often royal inscriptions that intentionally amplify fear. They are propaganda as much as record. But the pattern is consistent. Assyria uses violence as a message. Whether every event was as extreme as the inscriptions claim is debated, but the purpose of the language is clear. The second thread is control through deportation. Assyria does not only conquer, it relocates. Populations are moved across the empire, mixing people from different regions. This serves multiple purposes. It breaks local resistance, supplies labor where needed, and spreads cultural influence. It is a harsh policy, but it is also a form of administration. The empire is reshaped by moving its people. Now step into the capital cities that rise and fall. Ashur, Nimrud, Dur-Sharukin, Nineveh. Each capital is not only a palace, It is an administrative engine. Palaces are built to impress, to intimidate, and to organize. The reliefs on their walls are both art and state messaging. They show kings hunting, waging war, and receiving tribute. The image is clear. The king is the axis of order. Assyria also invests in information. The state wants to know what is happening at its borders. Reports from governors, letters from commanders, and intelligence from scouts flow into the palace. The archive becomes a nervous system. This is how the empire senses threats before they arrive. And then there is the economy. Assyria draws tribute and taxes from conquered regions. It controls trade routes and demands resources. But it also builds infrastructure that keeps the system moving: roads, storehouses, and administrative centers. The empire is not just extraction. It is a system that must keep itself supplied, and that requires organization. Pause on provincial control. Conquered regions are reorganized into provinces, each with a governor. The governor answers to the king, sends regular reports, and is responsible for tax collection, labor quotas, and local security. This is where the empire becomes legible. A province has boundaries, a capital, and a schedule of obligations. It is the administrative equivalent of a map. Vassal treaties are another tool. Some regions remain ruled by local kings who swear loyalty, pay tribute, and provide troops. These treaties are often explicit about consequences for betrayal. They are both legal and ritual documents designed to bind politics to religion. If a vassal breaks a treaty, it is framed not only as treason but as sacrilege. This is how Assyria fuses law and power. Now step into the everyday economy of the empire. Taxes are collected in grain, livestock, metals, and labor. Warehouses store these goods and scribes record them. Standard measures and weights make it possible to compare deliveries across provinces. That might sound mundane, but it is empire in practice. Without measurement, tribute is just a rumor. With measurement, it becomes enforceable. Craft production also expands. Deportees and local artisans are moved into state projects, palace construction, weapons manufacture, textiles, and luxury goods. The empire depends on skilled labor. This is why the population movements matter. They are not only punishment, they are resource allocation. The state moves people the way it moves timber or copper. Now pause on language. Akkadian is the administrative language of Assyria, and it travels with the empire. But Assyria rules over many tongues and cultures. This creates a multilingual world where orders are issued in one language and obeyed in another. The bureaucracy is a translation machine. It must convert the center's will into local reality, and that requires scribes who can bridge cultures. Religion is woven through all of this. Rituals, omens, and temple duties surround the king's decisions. The state does not only act, it asks the gods for guidance. Omens are read before campaigns. Rituals cleanse the palace. These practices are not superstition in their context. They are part of governance. If the king acts without divine approval, his legitimacy is threatened. Now pause on the king. Assyrian kings present themselves as divine agents, chosen by Ashur to impose order. Their inscriptions are full of ritual language and claims of duty. The king is a warrior, but he is also a builder. He restores temples, digs canals, and plants gardens. The message is that war creates the conditions for prosperity. This is where the Assyrian story becomes complex. The empire expands rapidly, but expansion creates new borders that are hard to hold. It requires constant campaigning. That pressure becomes the empire's rhythm. Unlike Babylon's legal culture, Assyria's stability depends on continuous action. If the army stops moving, the system weakens. Now consider how this affects the people inside the empire. Some benefit from the stability in trade. Others suffer under heavy tribute and forced labor. The evidence is uneven, and we should avoid absolute claims, but the pattern is clear. Assyria's order comes with high costs. It creates a network, but it also creates resentment. Let us look at the mechanisms of fear and persuasion together. The state uses dramatic public displays, reliefs, and inscriptions to project power, but it also offers protection and infrastructure. For a local city, submission can mean security on the roads and access to larger markets. It is not a simple story of oppression. It is a calculated exchange, and people make choices within that exchange. Now step into Nineveh at its height. The city is massive. Its walls are enormous. Inside, the palace of Ashurbanipal contains a library of clay tablets, one of the most famous in the ancient world. This is the third thread. Assyria collects knowledge. The library is not a side project. It is a statement that the empire does not only rule people, it also stores their memory. That library preserves myths, rituals, medical texts, omens, and literary epics. It is why we still know the Epic of Gilgamesh. The empire that terrifies its enemies also preserves their stories. That is a striking contradiction, and it complicates any simple narrative of brutality. Why collect knowledge? Partly because knowledge is power. Omen texts tell the king how to act. Medical texts protect the palace. Rituals keep the gods in alignment. Literature ties the king to the deep past. The library is a tool of legitimacy as much as it is a cultural project. Assyria is also a state of monumental art. The palace reliefs are not neutral. They are carefully composed. The king is always larger, always centered, always victorious. Even hunting scenes are political. The king is shown mastering chaos. The lion is a symbol of disorder, and the king's victory is a symbol of cosmic stability. These images are propaganda carved into stone. And yet they are also historical sources. They show clothing, weapons, siege machines, and rituals. They show the empire's view of itself. That is why the reliefs matter. Not because they are objective, but because they reveal the state's priorities. Now look at engineering. Assyria builds canals and aqueducts, especially around Nineveh. These projects bring water to cities, feed gardens, and demonstrate control over nature. The empire does not just conquer, it reorganizes landscapes. That is a different kind of power, one that leaves marks in the terrain. The logistics behind all of this are immense. Food must be moved to armies, horses must be fed, weapons must be produced, and tribute must be processed. This requires scribes, storehouses, and schedules. It requires a bureaucracy that can travel with the army and a palace that can track it all. This brings us to the role of writing again. In Assyria, writing is not only administration, it is surveillance. Reports, lists, and messages keep the center informed. The king receives daily intelligence. A state that can hear everything can act faster than its rivals. That is a critical advantage. Now step outside the core and into the borderlands. These are the places where the empire is most vulnerable. Forts, garrisons, and vassal kings are used to hold these zones. When they remain loyal, the empire is stable. When they revolt, the empire must respond quickly or the model breaks. This is why Assyria is so militarized. It does not just fight wars, it polices its system. Rebellions are not merely threats, they are threats to the credibility of the entire imperial order. So the response is swift and often harsh. The goal is not only to defeat, but to deter. Now consider the internal politics. The Assyrian court is complex. Succession is not always smooth. Royal heirs, queens, officials, and generals all have influence. When the center is strong, these factions are contained. When the center weakens, they can destabilize the system. Empires are not only tested at their borders, they are tested inside their palaces. We see this toward the end. Internal conflicts rise. Subject peoples revolt. External powers grow stronger. The Medes and Babylonians press from the east and south. The Assyrian heartland is no longer secure. The city walls that once symbolized invincibility begin to feel like a last defense. We should be cautious again. The fall of Assyria is complex. It is not a single collapse but a convergence of pressures: military overstretch, internal conflict, external coalitions. The evidence suggests a system that could not adapt fast enough to the scale of its challenges. And yet the legacy remains. Assyrian administrative practices, military techniques, and state ideology influenced later empires. Even as the cities fall, the model of empire survives. This is the paradox of Assyria. It is both a warning and a blueprint. Let me place you in the final moments of Nineveh. The sources describe destruction and fire. The city is sacked. The palace burns. But the clay tablets survive because they are baked by the flames. The very act of destruction preserves the archive. History is saved by catastrophe. That is why we can still hear Assyria's voice. The empire that relied on fear also left behind literature and records. The same bureaucracy that organized armies preserved knowledge. This is the emotional core of the episode. A state built on power that ends up preserving memory. If you step back across our series, the arc is sharper now. Sumer gave us organization and writing. Akkad gave us empire at scale. Ur-II gave us administrative precision. Old Babylon gave us law and contracts. Assyria gives us imperial machinery, logistics, intelligence, and cultural collection at its most intense. And that brings us to the next episode. After Assyria falls, Babylon rises again in a new form, the neo-Babylonian period. It will be less about constant war and more about monumental identity, architecture, and a revived cultural center. The question shifts again. After an empire of fear collapses, what does power look like when it tries to be a spectacle? That is where we go next. You and I are moving into the final arc of our Mesopotamia series, the neo-Babylonian period. After Assyria's fall, Babylon returns, but not as the old legal network or the Assyrian war machine. This time it is a spectacle of power, monumental architecture, revived identity, and a city that wants the world to look at it. The question is not only how Babylon rules, but how it persuades the world that it is the center again. Begin with the setting. Assyria collapses under pressure from a coalition of enemies, and the political map opens. Babylon, under Nabopolassar, emerges as a leading force. The transition is not a clean break. It is a rebalancing. What matters is that Babylon seizes the moment to rebuild its image and its reach. Then comes Nebuchadnezzar II. He is the figure who dominates the period, the builder king whose name becomes synonymous with Babylon itself. We should be careful. Later stories amplify his image, and some legends are not verifiable. But the evidence that does exist points to an ambitious program of construction and consolidation. The city becomes a stage. Picture Babylon in this era. The walls are enormous. The processional way is lined with glazed bricks. The Ishtar Gate rises in deep blue with striding lions and dragons. These are not just decorations. They are statements. A city that looks this powerful is trying to make its power feel inevitable. This is the first thread to hold. Neo-Babylon is power as display. It is a form of politics that works through scale and beauty. The city is designed to impress visitors, intimidate rivals, and reassure its own people. Architecture becomes propaganda in stone and brick. But the spectacle is not only aesthetic, it is also administrative. Construction requires labor, taxes, materials, and logistics. The same bureaucracy that fueled earlier empires now fuels building on a massive scale. When you see a wall or a gate, You are seeing thousands of coordinated actions: quarrying, transport, payroll, supervision. The beauty rests on a system. Now consider the economy. Babylon sits at the center of trade routes. Grain flows from the countryside. Luxury goods pass through markets. Temples manage land and labor. Royal projects demand steady supplies. The city's grandeur depends on a stable flow of resources. That stability is not automatic. It must be enforced and managed. We can also see how identity is being curated. The neo-Babylonian kings present themselves as restorers of ancient tradition. They invoke older gods, rebuild temples, and inscribe their names on foundations as if to say, "We are the true heirs of Sumer and Akkad." This is not just nostalgia, it is political legitimacy. Think about that message. After centuries of upheaval, Babylon claims continuity. It says that the past belongs here. That claim is part of the reason the city's myth grows so large. It is not only powerful, it is symbolic. Now pause on the famous question of the Hanging Gardens. Were they in Babylon? Were they elsewhere? The evidence is debated. Some scholars argue for Babylon, others for Assyria, possibly Nineveh. The honest answer is that we cannot be certain. What matters for our story is that the idea of the gardens fits the neo-Babylonian image, a city of wonder engineered to impress. The second thread is power through ritual. Temples and festivals become central to the city's rhythm. The New Year festival, for example, reinforces the king's role and the city's divine order. These rituals are not only religious, they are political theater. They tell everyone who belongs at the center. Now consider the empire beyond the walls. Babylon controls a broader region, but it is not endless. It governs through a mix of local administration, tribute, and military presence. The system is more focused than Assyria's constant campaigning, but it still requires force. When the king marches, it is a reminder that spectacle is backed by power. This period also intersects with the history of Judah and the exile of elites to Babylon. The sources for this are complex and come from multiple traditions. We should be careful not to simplify. What can be said is that Babylon becomes a place of displacement and memory for many groups. This adds another layer to the city's legacy. Now step into the scribal world. Babylonian scholars preserve and copy older texts. Astronomical observations become more systematic. The priests track the sky, record omens, and build a tradition of careful observation. This is a quieter form of power, knowledge that outlasts kings. It is worth lingering here. The neo-Babylonian period leaves behind records that helped later cultures develop astronomy and mathematics. We should not overstate continuity, but the evidence suggests that careful observation and record-keeping were important. The city's intellectual life is part of its power. Now look at the daily life beneath the monuments. Markets fill with traders, workers haul bricks, priests perform rituals. The grandeur of Babylon is built on ordinary routines. If the routines fail, the spectacle cracks. That is the tension. The extraordinary depends on the ordinary. We can also notice the role of water. Canals and embankments protect and feed the city. The Euphrates is both a lifeline and a risk. Floods and shortages shape policy. The city's builders must manage water with the same care as they manage walls. Let's step into the palace for a moment. There are workshops for artisans, storage rooms for tribute, and offices for scribes. Orders flow down to foremen, and reports flow back up. The building of Babylon is not a single project. It is a continuous process of organization. Now consider the outer towns and countryside. Fields, orchards, and villages supply the city. Taxes in grain and labor support the temples and the palace. This rural backbone is easy to forget when we focus on the city's splendor, but without it the spectacle cannot stand. Think about the processional way again. It is not just a road, it is a ritual corridor. During festivals, the gods' statues move through the city. The king participates in rituals that reassert cosmic order. This is a different kind of control, not only force but ceremony. The people see the order and they are invited to believe in it. Now consider the materials of Babylon. Blue glazed bricks are expensive. They require skilled artisans and controlled production. The very surface of the city reflects state capacity. When a visitor sees shimmering blue walls, they are seeing the city's ability to coordinate labor and resources at scale. The city's symbolism also reaches outward. Diplomatic gifts, tribute, and foreign delegations bring news of Babylon's power back to their own regions. The city's image is exported. In this sense, Babylon does not only rule by force, it rules by reputation. We should also think about land and ownership. Temples and the crown control large estates. Contracts record leases, harvest obligations, and deliveries. The archive shows a world where property is formalized and tracked. That paperwork makes the economy legible, and legibility is a kind of power. Some labor is seasonal, some is permanent. Craft workshops, brick production, and palace projects require continuous workers. The state assigns labor through obligations, and the temples coordinate manpower for ritual and agriculture. This is not a free labor market, it is a managed system. Now imagine a caravan arriving at Babylon's gates. Traders bring metals, timber, stone, and textiles. They pay fees and pass through checkpoints. The city is not only a destination, it is a filter. Whoever controls the gate controls the flow, and that is how Babylon turns geography into revenue. Let's pause on chronology for a moment. The neo-Babylonian period is relatively brief compared to the long span of Mesopotamian history. That is part of the irony. The most famous Babylon is also one of the shortest lived as an empire. This reminds us that cultural memory does not always track political duration. Now consider the city's layout. It is a planned space with districts, gates, and sacred zones. The temples sit in prominent positions. Processional routes tie them together. The city is designed to guide people's movement, and by guiding movement it guides attention. This is architecture as choreography. The walls themselves are more than defense. They are a statement of scale. They tell visitors and residents that this city is protected, permanent, and worth obeying. The moat and outer defenses create layers, literal thresholds that turn entry into a ritual of submission. Even the brick stamps matter. Bricks are often inscribed with the king's name. This is a quiet form of domination. Every wall becomes a repeated signature. You cannot forget who built the city because his name is everywhere, embedded in the fabric. Now pause on the central temple complex. The Esagila and the ziggurat dominate the sacred landscape. The king's legitimacy is tied to these places, and his building projects there are as political as they are religious. By rebuilding the center, he presents himself as the restorer of cosmic order. We can also see Babylon's law and contracts continuing older traditions. Merchants still write agreements, families still record inheritance, temples still manage land. The legal culture of old Babylon does not disappear. It becomes part of the city's everyday machinery. The spectacular city is still sustained by quiet paperwork. Now consider how Babylon is remembered. Later traditions turn the city into a symbol of pride, splendor, and sometimes arrogance. Those memories are shaped by the city's architecture and by the stories told about it. Whether those stories are fair is not the point. The point is that Babylon becomes larger than itself, a metaphor as much as a place. That tells you something about how power works. A city can lose its empire and still win the memory. The neo-Babylonian period is brief, but its image is enormous. That image becomes one of the most enduring in ancient history. So we have a city that is magnificent, administratively capable, and culturally confident. But the system is still fragile. A state that relies on spectacle can be undermined if the resources to sustain it weaken. And a state that relies on a single center can be vulnerable to external shocks. This is where the third thread appears: vulnerability hidden beneath grandeur. The very concentration of power in Babylon means that if the center is captured, the whole system changes quickly. The empire's coherence depends on one city. Now look at the rise of the Persians. Under Cyrus, a new force grows in the east. The Persian expansion is systematic and diplomatic as well as military. Babylon's defenses are strong, but the empire is no longer the only power in the region. The political balance shifts again. When Babylon falls to Cyrus, the transition is surprisingly smooth in some accounts. The city is taken without the catastrophic destruction that ended Nineveh. We should not romanticize this. The reality was still a transfer of power, but the difference in tone is telling. The age of Babylon's dominance ends not in fire but in absorption. And yet the city's image survives. Babylon remains a symbol in later cultures, a place of grandeur, pride, and memory. Its monuments, whether still standing or remembered, outlive its political power. The neo-Babylonian period becomes the most famous version of Babylon, even as its empire was relatively brief. So what is the emotional core of this episode? It is the tension between display and durability. Babylon builds a city that looks eternal, but history is not. The city's beauty is real, but it cannot protect the empire forever. If you step back across our series, the arc is complete. Sumer gave us organization and writing. Akkad gave us empire at scale. Ur-II gave us administrative precision. Old Babylon gave us law and contracts. Assyria gave us imperial machinery. Neo-Babylon gives us spectacle and memory, the city as symbol. And that takes us to the end of our series. 6 episodes, 6 different answers to the same question. How do human societies build order in a world that keeps changing? Mesopotamia's story is not linear. It is layered. Power shifts, but memory stays. The cities fall, but the records remain. That is where we close.